Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Johnson, for the accommodation. I have another meeting in a few minutes I need to get to, but wanted to, first of all, thank you, Mr. Chair, for your ongoing diligence on oversight here. And thank all three witnesses for participating. I do have a couple questions for Professor Armstrong, but wanted to begin with Ms. Fano, not only as a follow-up to the chairman's question. I guess the follow-up, and then I'll share the personal. The follow-up is, so if some of the clear recommendations were to be followed and there is more transparency and more true data sharing, how could that help you, your family, so many other families across the country that have experienced similar tragedies?
A big part in what had occurred with our family involved our trust. Consistently, we were told to do things a certain way and that things were going correctly. We did not know about how many incidents had occurred. Had we known, had we been disclosed the information of how horrendous the conditions are in that facility and how few actually received adequate care, we would have insisted upon a different outcome. A lot of our decisions came from pure trust towards our system, towards the appointed attorney that we had, as well as the staff members at that correctional facility. So, should we change that? I do believe that other families might make the right decisions, might have more acknowledgement of the potential dangers, and with that acknowledgement can come change.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing. And look, I know the data in front of us, the report that's being discussed, spans, from jails and folks that are pretrial to prisons, folks that have been convicted of a wide range of crimes, short sentences, long sentences, and everything in between. But that does nothing to take away fundamental human rights. I mentioned a minute ago that there's just a couple of personal comments I wanted to share, and it begins with applauding you for being so forthcoming on concern about mental health and mental health conditions. My wife's a mental health advocate. Our family's big on making sure we're undoing stigma and raising awareness. It's one thing to talk about in the PTSD in the military context, another when it comes to, mothers suffering from postpartum depression, or in the higher education space, right? Stress on college campuses, and across the board, mental health is a big concern. Prior to the pandemic, we've all experienced a huge uptick during the COVID-19 pandemic, and it's important to recognize that whether it's jails, prisons, other institutions are no exception to that. And again, I come back to the human rights people deserve in terms of access to care, quality of care, and truth. So the other piece, you grew up not too far from where I grew up, very similar communities. So your story resonates, and I appreciate your courage to be here and to share. Professor Armstrong, following up on some of your work and some of the testimony you've submitted, in 2020, Reuters completed an investigation into how an estimated 5,000 people died in jails throughout the country in a single year. And that's jails. It's not counting prisons. So these people died without ever having their case even heard at trial. The data is sadly clear and compelling. The U.S. correctional system occupies a space where class, race, gender, and a host of other factors influence how long or how demanding your time in custody will be. However, pre-trial time spent in a correctional facility should never be a de facto death sentence. So I noticed that in your written testimony, and I'll quote, "A lack of transparency on deaths in custody undermines our nation's commitment to public safety." Could you walk through the subcommittee through how a detailed accounting of deaths in custody would better inform our policymaking here in Congress?
Absolutely. So first, the nationwide data from 2000 to 2019 shows that 20% of deaths in custody were actually of people facing charges, meaning they had never had a trial. In Louisiana, that was 14% of our deaths were pretrial. But think about it this way. If community members don't trust the policing, the sheriffs, the facilities, right, and the fact that our system is capable of delivering justice, they are less likely to report crime. They are less likely to serve as a witness or to provide testimony in a criminal trial. And they are less likely to themselves feel protected by those same systems when they are a victim of trial. And so public trust in our criminal justice institutions is fundamental. When we see the death penalty exacted without a judicial sentence, and where a person's range their probability of death is simply a factor of which facility they are assigned to, that undermines their trust and it undermines all of our safety.
Thank you. And just a final question. In your written testimony, again, you listed a number of suggested amendments that you believe could be useful for better collecting data. So it's one thing to share data, but if you're not even collecting it on the front end, that's another issue. Among the suggestions you made is that the Bureau of Justice Assistance collect information on incarcerated people's specific medical illnesses and pre-existing conditions. Did you mean to include mental health conditions as well? And just briefly elaborate on that.
So what we know from from BJS, right, so the earlier data, is they actually did collect mental health observation and practices, medical illnesses as well, although they only asked pre-existing conditions for medical conditions. They did not ask for mental health. So when I proposed reverting back to those categories that we used to collect data on, that would include mental health as well as medical health.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.